All right, my dears, this is going to be a quick video to clarify what is chord closure and what is it when I talk about vocal cord closure, what am I talking about specifically? Pretty much to break it down into its simplest terms, when I'm talking about chord closure, I'm talking about chord closure in the phonation process, in the process of singing. When I say chord closure, it doesn't mean to literally squeeze your chords shut completely so that no air passes through. I'm talking about optimal chord closure in which the chords are coming together and they're also coming apart for air to go through the chords, but mainly the amount of time that they are together is more than the amount of time that they are not together, in order to produce a clear tone and in order to be connected to the full voice. You have to remember that in order to produce any tone, the chords need to vibrate. And those vibrations happen when they come together and apart, together and apart, together and apart, together and apart. So no, chord closure doesn't mean just closing the windpipe and using the vocal cords as a sphincter. No, it means that they will come apart, but we want it so that the amount of time that they are together is greater than the amount of time that they are apart. And so the opening in which the air passes through the chords is very narrow. However, there are extremes to this process, just like there are extremes to everything. If it's too close or if it's too narrow, there's too much muscular tension involved. And if it's not narrow enough or too loose, then the tone is going to be breathy and not very resonant. So let's talk about the 5 ways in which you can actually initiate vocal cord closure. And fun fact, only one of these is correct for singing. Number 1, you close your chords and you squeeze them shut so that no air at all can come out. To initiate this type of cord closure, it takes a lot of muscular tension because you're using all the muscles in your neck to create this cord closure and maintain it closed. An example of this would be to take a deep breath and then close the chords completely. You're going to realize that if I'm keeping the chords closed, there is no tone happening. There's a lot of neck tension occurring. And because I'm taking a breath, like I'm about to sing, my lungs now have air. And since they have air, that air wants to go somewhere. It wants to come out. And that pressure of it wanting to come out is what we call subglottic pressure. So when we squeeze shut our cord so that no air comes out, we're gonna feel a lot of subglottic pressure, especially if we're trying to talk or sing or hum, but at the same time we are forcing shut, squeezed our cord so that no air can come out. So, if any teacher is telling you that they want you to stop the air, or if they want you to close your chords to the point that no air goes through it, then either they don't know what they're talking about, or what's more commonly happening is that they're trying to explain a concept, but they're just using wrong terminology. If you are stopping the air and squeezing shut your vocal cords, no tone will be produced. Simply put, if air is not going through the vocal cords, there is no vibration and there is no phonation. There is no sound being made. Obviously, this way is not the correct chord closure that I'm talking about when it comes to singing. Number 2, chord closure in which I am closing my chords really, really tight, almost to the point where I'm squeezing them shut, but air is still able to just squeak through. This equals a grunt. And you see this all the time with weightlifters or people that go to the gym who are either lifting too big or, they're not really lifting with the right technique, and most of the time it's lifters who really aren't singers, so they don't care about the vocal cords. But this can be quite damaging too to the health of the vocal cord. An example of this would be, again, to take a deep breath and then just allow just a little bit of air to just squeeze through the chords. You're going to realize again that this takes a lot of muscular tension to keep those chords squeezed and not allow air to go through, or just allow a little bit of air to squeak through. It's going to sound like this. there's a lot of muscular tension happening in my vocal cords. And remember, again, the air that you take in wants to come out. So the human body is a gigantic pressure tank. The air that inflates the lungs wants to escape, and it has to escape through the vocal cords. So if you're squeezing them shut, or you're just allowing a tiny little bit of air to squeak through, you're gonna feel a lot of subglottic pressure. Subglottic pressure plus muscle tension equals fatigue. It equals tiredness. It equals tightness. And it does not allow the ability for the vocal cords to stretch and thin to their optimal capacity. Number 3, this is where we find the optimal amount of cord closure, the middle ground, right? In which the cords are coming together and air is passing through quite generously, but it's not blowing through the cords. It's passing through in a narrow opening, but it's doing so in a stream of air. Imagine a water hose. When you turn on your water hose, it doesn't throw gulps of water. No, it's a stream of water. In that same way, when we take a breath, air needs to be passing through the cords to create vibration and be able to do so in a pressurized, but not too pressurized, pressurized and generous amount of air, so that it creates a beam of air or a pressurized stream of air. It would sound like this. That's a pressurized stream of air coming, okay? Because it's a generous amount, the subglottic pressure underneath the cords doesn't build up to the point where it fatigues me. There's gonna be pressure, but just not enough to tire you out or feel like you're lifting 100 pounds. An example of this would be this. Take a deep breath. This is correct cord closure for singing. And this is the type of cord closure I talk about in all my videos. Again, this is cord closure in which the cords are coming together more than they are coming apart, and the opening is still narrow. It's just not so narrow that air is barely squeezing through like a grunt, and it's also not squeezed shut like the first example in which no air is coming through at all. Being able to close your cords in this manner is the most optimal way to phonate a clear sound that is connected to the full voice. Like I mentioned in my previous video, if you have cord closure, you are in full voice. And I'm going to mention it again. This type of cord closure is not abrasive, like the second example. It is gentle and it is generous with the amount of air going through. And the cords themselves have a certain amount of tension that they're still allowed to stretch and thin. However, they're not loose, like in the next example. The next example of cord closure is actually very close to the one we just talked about. The cords are still coming together, but they're actually more apart than they are together. The cords are still together, creating a narrow, very narrow opening for a nice, generous stream to go through, but they're actually more apart than they are together. And the vocal cords themselves are a little bit more loose than when we're actually closing them for opera singing. And yes, I am talking about reinforced falsetto. In this example, the cords are actually coming together slightly in a different angle than when we're engaged with a full voice. An example of this would sound like this. Take a deep breath. It's very, 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 very close to the cord closure that I talk about when singing in full voice. However, the sound is slightly breathier, is slightly less resonant, and of course, we're now singing in falsetto. So a much greater amount of air is blowing through the cords so that the subglottic pressure that builds up, again, below the glottis, below the vocal cords, is much less than when we're actually engaging the full voice. And therefore, falsetto feels lighter, it feels nice. It doesn't have a risk of endangering your vocal health because in falsetto, the chords are loose, there's very little muscle tension, and the chords are in a place, again, where they're very loose and stretchy and they thin. I like to use this as a developing tool to find the full voice. And that is where all my videos really talk about, is approaching the voice in a gentle manner. Most of us want to sound like Caruso, Corelli, Mario del Monaco, like right from the start. Those great singers did all of this, okay? They're the finished product. They did all of this and they moved on to the advanced stuff. But if it's your day one or even just year one, if you don't allow your chords to stretch and thin, there's just no point in continuing to the more advanced stuff because then the voice is just stuck. The fifth example, I think it's the fifth or the sixth, I don't know. I lost count. But the next example, chord closure in which the chords again are coming together, but they're much more apart than they are together. The vocal cords are very loose and a lot of air is blowing through it. This is again falsetto, but a much more breathier falsetto. And the tone has a breathy quality to it. An example of this is this. Breathe. Ha, ha, ooh. Again, this example is not bad. I can use this as a developing tool to develop a reinforced falsetto, which then will develop into the full voice. The only problem with this is that the chords, even though it's better than the other extreme, which is a lot of muscle tension, in this example, the chords aren't really closing very much because even though they're vibrating, because again, if the chords don't vibrate, we don't have a sound. Even though they're vibrating, they're very loose, very loose. And even though the ability to stretch and thin is there, we're not using air efficiently anymore in this example. We're gonna run out of air super quickly because we're just blowing through it. And there's very little to almost no subglottic pressure here because the air is free to come in and come out because again, the chords are open. I would take this and help people who are in the other extreme that are really tense when it comes to chord closure. I would take them to this extreme to find freedom in muscular tension when it comes to chord closure. And understanding that you can phonate in this manner as well. And so there's no subglottic pressure to tire them. And because they have to build the habit of be able to vibrate the chords without any muscular tension, at least to that extreme, right? To the extreme of closing the chords so much. This is a good developing tool to kind of get them to sing in this manner, to just build this habit as a reminder to say, hey, you know, you can sigh, you can create a sound that doesn't take a lot of force and muscularity involved to create it. Ha, ha, ha. Although it's breathy, at least it's not muscularly tense. And now the final example of what you could do with your chord closure is not close them at all. In this case, it's the total extreme of completely shutting them closed. This would be not closing them at all. An example of this would be this. Take a deep breath. As you can see, there is no sound. Why is there no sound other than perhaps what you hear is the air just going through the chords? There is no sound because the chords are not coming together and coming apart. In other words, there is no vibration. And again, just like we said in the beginning, if there is no vibration, if the chords are not coming together and coming apart, there is no sound. So in this example, I'm taking a very deep breath. The air is filling up my lungs. And as it comes out, there is no resistance at all. So there is actually zero subglottic pressure. And I'm just blowing open my cords. Obviously, this is the other extreme, and this has no place in singing because we're not using the air efficiently at all. We're just taking a big breath and then getting rid of it all in a second. We're getting rid of it in a puff of air. And again, there is no sound. So now you have all the examples from one extreme to the other extreme. You have the entire spectrum of chord closure, from its most extreme, which is absolutely shutting and closing the cords to the extreme to the point that no sound comes out, all the way to the not closing them at all and keeping them open. And as you can imagine, when it comes to singing, and I always say this, is very Buddha, you have to find the balance. And the balance is the optimal chord closure that I'm talking about, right? It's the ability to close the chord, have chord closure in a manner that the chords are coming together more than they are coming apart, but they are coming apart so that a generous amount of stream of air is able to go through them, but not to the point that it's blowing open the vocal cords. If you're able to get this balance, you're going to get the most clear, beautiful sound when it comes to singing. I hope that was helpful, and I hope that this clarifies a lot of what I talk about when I mention chord closure. Again, this is the chord closure that I talk about when it comes to singing. Closure that allows vibration, engages the full voice, and allows the ability to create the most clearest tone when it comes to singing. The vocal instrument is a very versatile instrument, and it can do a lot of things. So there's a lot of wrong ways to do it, and only really very few correct ways to do it. And when it comes to bel canto and opera, we want the most optimal way, the most efficient way. And this is the chord closure that is the most efficient. Ciao, ciao for now. Hope that clarifies that. The work continues. Bye-bye, everybody.